Welcome to Gulplok. We have all assembled here today for a book discussion on a personality who has not been forgotten and will never be in the perspective of India. However, this book discussion adds in a lot of perspective in the contemporary world as well, because we are also going to look at aspects such as communication, myth, and the transformation of how people look at the personality or his legacies in the current world is what we are going to look at. So, welcome everyone. Today's book discussion is the book is entitled Gandhian Thought and Communication, Rethinking the Mahatma in Media Age. This discussion is being collaborated with All India Communication and Media Association, ICMA, and in today's session, I, Antara, will be moderating, and we have two panelists with us today, along with the editor. The panelists that we have here today are Professor Salil Misra, historian from Ambedkar University. We have Professor Bishnu Mohapatra, political scientist from Krea University. And not just that, we also have the editor of the book, Professor Biswajit with us, who is the founding director of Center for Culture, Media and Governance, Jamia Millia Islamia. So in this session, first I briefly introduce the book to you. This book has been published in 2020 by Sage. The book has been divided across 10 chapters by where different authors have contributed to the book. And not just that, but the thematic areas that the book has touched upon talks about, of course, the Gandhian legacy, but also the myths and metaphors that were associated with this personality, connecting it to the contemporary times of media on what is the significance, how do we see Gandhi, or rather, how do we decipher his understanding and his ideas on nationalism or patriotism in the current context. So, with this, I would like to open the discussion today for the panelists. So, the first discussant that I would like to invite today is Professor Bishnu Mohapatra. We will see what he has to say and then we shall move across.
Thank you, Antara, and thank you, my dear friends, Professor Salil and Professor Bishop. It was a great pleasure to actually read the edited volume that Biswajit put together. The title itself is quite an entry into rethinking Gandhi and rethinking Gandhi in the digital age, perhaps. I mean, I would say in the media age would be perhaps saying that it's a digital age, and it's also about Gandhian thought and communication. I think, what I'd be doing, I enjoyed reading the book. What I'd be doing is actually providing a context in which I read the book and what really spoke to me. And instead of really going to each and every essay or specifically the essays contained in the book. So first thing I think struck me is that, Gandhi, if we remember the work by Shahid Amin, Gandhi as Mahatma, Gandhi, the phenomenon of Gandhi himself is produced, or Gandhi is a product of a complex network communication in the colonial period through anti-colonial struggle. That how Gandhi was seen, what Gandhi or Gandhiism, if one were to put that term, was all about during his period, let's say from 1920s till 1940s, you would see that it was, if that argument has to be believed, was actually produced through a complex network communication. And what was that network communication? It was also in some sense a kind of active translation. And when I say translation, it's not merely people are saying what Gandhi, they thought, was saying about colonial politics, about society, about caste, about spinning, about body, about tradition, about religion, about individual lives, and so on. But it's also about they're translating into many, many registers, many, many Indian languages. There's a whole body of work, I think, in Indian languages on Gandhi, which I think has, according to me, has not adequately explored, which actually can tell us a lot about how Gandhi or Gandhism was really produced through a very complex set of hermeneutics, if I were to use that as. Second, of course, is the straightforward understanding, which is the book is trying to suggest that Gandhi has something to say about communication, how Gandhi himself communicated his ideas uh, as as a chief protagonist of anti-colonial struggle in some sense, in some sense who is shaping it, who sometimes who is providing certain ideas, became the point around which many people, whether they're people who supported him or people who opposed him, putting him at the center of the anti-colonial struggle. So that I thought was an important comment that I want to make at the very beginning. The second, the when we think about Gandhi and Gandhi's communication and how Gandhi was received, I think anything that we can say about Gandhi or Gandhism has to be a combination of what Gandhi said or wrote and what people received or reception of Gandhian ideas. Because that, according to me, together would constitute uh, uh, that what you can say legitimately about Gandhi or Gandhism. We know that during his lifetime, after his death, what people think Gandhi said, what goes in the name of Gandhian thought, what goes in the name of uh, Gandhian politics or philosophy or ideas, were always in excess of what really Gandhi's ideas are all about. When I say in excess, that in other words, when people are interpreting Gandhi, let's say in a village or 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 in a kasbah, or somebody who's writing a local reporter in the local newspaper, or students, they're not really saying that they're not authenticating by saying that, oh, this is what Gandhi said, and nobody's quoting Gandhi's text and authenticating it. So it's always an excess. And that's one of the reasons why Gandhi's ideas have been so powerful. That's why not merely powerful. You find that, for example, there's nobody who who can be compared. For example, you would find somebody would be described as a Gandhi of Cuttack, Gandhi of Muzaffarpur, Gandhi of Moradabad, Gandhi of Koraput. There are many Gandhis there are many people who are described as Gandhi of this, Gandhi of that, Gandhi of smaller proportion, Gandhi of a smaller territory, Gandhi of a particular region. Why is that? It's precisely because there is something people identify as, rightly or wrongly, as quintessential Gandhi. And therefore, I don't think there's anybody had replicated the way Gandhi has been replicated in so many ways in this country. So that, I think, is a very important thing I wanted to say. Third thing that I wanted to say as a methodological thing is that our relationship, often, when I say our dominant relationship with Gandhi, is fairly alienated in the philosophical sense. People who thought that Gandhi was a saint, Gandhi was a Mahatma, Gandhi was really much beyond what we consider as ordinary individual attributes, their relationship with Gandhi then become very alienated, because after all, you are actually projecting certain qualities onto Gandhi, and therefore your relationship with and you lack them. Your lack and you are projecting them to the Gandhi make your relationship it quite alienated. Second, those who thought that Gandhi can be really appropriated and Gandhi can then be, let's say, philosophy of Gandhi. Gandhi was not a philosopher, but there have been several attempts over a period of time to say that how can we really make Gandhi like a philosopher? So disciplines or academic disciplines wanted to appropriate Gandhi. I think that relationship, according to me, I would like to submit is also fairly alienated, because you have to really put Gandhi into a certain template, certain frame, and say that, okay, Gandhi is also a philosopher. Gandhi is also a political scientist. Gandhi also is a fantastic sociologist, or Gandhi is a good ethnographer, because Gandhi had an eye to look at the details of human lives and stuff like that. And this is, I think, according to me, a good and productive interpretation of Gandhi, therefore, has to be established not on the ground of this alienated engagement, but a non-alienated engagement. I think is, according to me, is very important. And you find that in the book, the edited volume, in some essays, for example, you would find the the way Sadhan Jha talks about Gandhi's charkha, or Dev Pathak talking about how Gandhi is being taught. You find those dilemmas before us, that how Gandhi has to be read, how Gandhi's ideas to be understood, and how people understood, how different they were, and how they oscillated between multiple registers. I think that something is very, very important. I think what we really, and we know that Gandhi, in many ways, I think our connection with Gandhi sometimes is quite disconcerting, because we want to have Gandhi which is safe, which is not going to disrupt too much of what we believe in, how we live. And that's one of the reasons sometimes Gandhi's ideas about, let's say, his way of living is something people just keep it away, because they think that's not really what is possible. And Gandhi's ideas about politics, for example. People talk a lot about Gandhian politics, but there is very little that we truly engage with his ideas of politics, in the sense that his thinking of politics as not dominant way of thinking about society and human lives is something which we don't want to accept, because for us politics is the yuga dharma. But if you look at carefully, Gandhi's ideas about politics is not treating it as a yuga dharma, not treating it as the dominant thing. It may sound a little paradoxical to say that Gandhi's ideas of politics was really not so central to somebody who organized anti-colonial struggle and politics and so on. This is something which I thought is an interesting to see. Gandhi is only once in his lifetime contested election. That was to the Gujarat Sahitya Parishad in 1917, and lost. Of course, nobody mentions about Gandhi's contesting that election for the presidency of Gujarat Parishad and lost. And to best of my knowledge, he didn't contest another election. So the interesting thing about the thing is that when Gandhi disconcerts, we want to make him little safe. We want to, because Gandhi has to be consumed in a way, and that's where I think the edited volume is an important entry point, that how Gandhi is finally consumed, how Gandhi appears to us, how comfortable we are with Gandhi, and why is it that a lot of uncomfortable things about Gandhi, which are actually quite relevant to our world, we keep it away or keep it at bay, as it were. Take, for example, his thinking about charkha or relationship with nature. Now, this relationship with nature, how would you understand the relationship with nature? For example, the famous philosopher Akil Bilgrami once posed a very important question. When is that nature turned into a natural resource? How is that, what is Gandhi's ideas about living and nature? And what should be our relationship with nature? Nature within and nature outside. Why is it in a country like ours, where nature often is considered to be sacred, and nature is actually ravaged? How does one explain that disconnect? and stuff like that. So I think there are much that we can learn from Gandhi, provided we are ready to accept those elements of his ideas which are disrupting our train of thought, those who are truly subversive, that truly exposes our own contradictions, exposes our way of thinking about politics and society, and so on and so forth. I think unless we do that, I think this is we would, as I said, our relationship with him will be completely an alienated relationship. And Biswajit's volume with so many, including Sasi Hussain's essay on Ahmedabad the strike, Ratnakar's thing about confessional mode, Rabindran's essay about Gandhi, reception of Gandhi, if I were to put it, in the digital age, reflections on Hind Swaraj, essays on Hind Swaraj in the volume, they all have the possibility, once again, to ask these very fundamental questions about Gandhi. That why, as I remember, there's an essay by Ashish Nandi who said the four Gandhis. There are not four Gandhis. There may be many more Gandhis, but there is a Gandhi that we always wanted to keep at bay, and that Gandhi, which is not really conducive to the production processes of our time, to the consumption pattern of our times, to rethink politics differently, to bring a thicker connection between living and politics, living and other things. What we have done, that we have really taken the trials of living, the challenges of living outside the domain of politics, outside the domain of education, outside the domain of many things. Lives don't matter, and as a result, and Gandhi actually all the time telling us, yes, these are ideas, but what are they doing to human lives? What do they have to say about living? This disjunction between living and ideas, living and institutions, is where Gandhi comes in. This is the true, according to me, is the most significant aspect of, every reading of Gandhi, like reading of any great thinker, has to be partial. I'm not saying that you can never have a totalizing reading. I think that will be quite unproductive. But I think the way I look at Gandhi, the Gandhi that really disrupts, Gandhi that really shows the contradiction on my face, and then how do we deal with Gandhi? When Gandhi disrupts, we say that no, Gandhi was very utopian. Gandhi is not applicable in 21st century. Gandhi was not pragmatic, and that's how we deal with Gandhi. We say Gandhi was an idealist. This is not for us, and we can really then put him at a place, or at a pedestal, or as an enemy, depending on where you are, and say that okay, he's not relevant, because then we're bracketing all the questions that he's asking, and these questions are making us uncomfortable. And so there are many ways one can think about it while interpreting Gandhi. Either you look at it from a high end and say that, look how Gandhi can be appropriated. People say that how Gandhi's use of Gujarati language was quite subversive. And he used a lot of, tadbhab or desi words instead of really tatsam words. Tatsam words are words which are derived from Sanskrit.
Right.
And this was what the Gujarati that Gandhi encountered when he wrote Hind Swaraj. And that's one of the reasons why Hind Swaraj is never a popular text as far as the Gujarati reading public was concerned. Nobody read his Gujarati text because people thought that his language was very crude. His language was very desi and very tadbhab-like, rather than tatsam like. So the time has come when Gandhi has to be read through the lens of Tadbhab and Desi, and allow us to really disrupt our thinking. Gandhi can only make sense if he is irritating us. He is disconcerting us. He is not allowing himself to be domesticated by us. You can't really fully put him into a template. And that, I think, is what is necessary. I think to some extent, I think Biswajit's edited volume is an attempt, as he says in the introduction, exploring the unexplored terrain. Because there's a whole, books on Gandhi have been produced over a period of time. In the last 20, 30 years, there have been significant work on Gandhi. And so what he's saying that, look, there are still terrain in which you ask some relevant questions. You can still see Gandhi in some new ways. That will make Gandhi a genuine conversational partner of ours, rather than an alienated relationship that people established with him for a very, very long time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The points that were raised by Professor Bishnu has opened the platform to a more interesting terrain. So I don't want to waste much time and welcome our next panelist, Professor Salil Misra, and see what he has to say, and then we'll open the platform to the author and the editor.
Uh, Thank you, Antara. I'm also very happy that I got this opportunity to speak on the book, extremely important book. And let me straight away join Bishnu in saying that it's an important volume. But for me, the real importance of the volume is that it is not mono-stranded. In that sense, it is not really a coherent volume. I mean, it's much richer, it's diverse. It's not, the sense that you get is, it's not that 10 people got together and read each other's minds and discussed a great deal and then produced 10 articles. It's more like 10 different people who had 10 different trajectories of thought, and then they produced their thoughts, which were put together in a single volume. So quite often you find the argument and the counter argument, and that is really the strength of the volume. So the first article places a great deal of reliance on Hind Swaraj as a text, and the second article by Alok Vajpayee, that really critiques so much of reliance on Hind Swaraj. So you get multiple perspectives. That, I think, is an importance of the volume. The second important thing about the volume is that it creates openings for a theory. It's not really a theoretical volume. It's not really, it does not have a fully rounded, well-finished, well-furnished theoretical arguments, but it creates multiple openings for it. It provides a lot of data for theory. And I think that is important. And I think, as Biswajit's volume says, that communication theories is really a European domain. And that can be said about not just theories of communication, but about most social science theories. Now, the problem with this position is that our theories tend to be very, very European, or if you like, Eurocentric. We can even call it a kind of conceptual imperialism that we are still living under. The theories are meant to be applied to the whole world, but the data for those theories comes completely from Europe. And that makes those theories extremely poor, extremely inadequate. What do you do with Africa, India, Asia, China? How are these theories to be applied? These theories, therefore, need to be enriched. They can be enriched only if data from these societies, from Asia, from India, from Africa, if that were to be used and inputs into theories. And once that happens, then that would enrich theories and make them truly global. I think what the volume does is that it provides data for theories of communication. This data comes from India, and this data comes from an extremely important individual whose importance everyone recognizes, Gandhi. So it does not have a very concretely well worked out theory, but it has plenty of data which has the capacity of questioning global theories of communication, but also enriching them, also modifying them, questioning them, but modifying them, not rejecting them completely. So it provides a lot of data. And I think that's a very important contribution of the volume. It should make people relook at theories, and it should make people want to modify, rework theories of communication. Then they would become much more relevant and truly global. I think the second thing that I want to say is that the book also talks about a kind of a dilemma that Gandhi was facing, confronting, handling, and it's a very specifically Gandhian dilemma. How do you combine the roles of a thinker, a communicator, and a man of action? Gandhi was all three of them. And he was not a thinker in the simple sense of doing thinking. He was a thinker in the sense of practicing deep and sustained thought. Now, the deep and sustained thought has to be also communicated at the same time, because Gandhi is a communicator. And he's very, very worried about this fact that his thinking is constantly undergoing change. He's not the same person. His thoughts have undergone considerable change from Hind Swaraj. Even while he's writing his autobiography, he expresses these doubts that I'm writing my autobiography, but by the time I finished writing it, I have changed many of my ideas. But my followers will believe me for the ideas that I have written. So you can protect your thought by not communicating them, but then the thought loses its relevance. But the moment you communicate your thoughts, you face a dilemma. The dilemma is that your thoughts are constantly undergoing change. You would not want to be evaluated only on the basis of a tiny little book that you wrote in 1909. You've gone much beyond that. Life is so rich. Your experiences are so rich, and they are constantly changing your thoughts. And a man of thinking has to incorporate fresh data, fresh ideas, fresh experiences. And Gandhi is also a man of action. He has what I would call a diagnostic personality, in the sense that thoughts have to be related to concrete action. Thoughts, the importance of thoughts are not in their abstraction. The importance of thoughts are in their application, not in abstraction, applicability. The thoughts have to be applied. And they have to be applied not just by Gandhi, but thousands of others. Those thoughts have to be communicated to them, and they have to apply. So the three tasks of a thinker, in the sense of being engaged in deep and sustained thinking, a communicator who must all the time constantly communicate his ideas to people, to his followers, but also to the world, and a man of action. How do you combine these things? And therefore, Gandhi is constantly clarifying himself. Alok Vajpayee's article gives enormous articles about how he says in the 20s that I'm not against railways, I'm not against modern technology, I'm not against hospitals, I'm not against lawyers, I'm not against parliaments. He, in fact, encourages the formation of Congress ministries in 1937. So he's constantly making these clarifications because he's accountable to the people. He must tell people, he must constantly communicate with people. And that's very important. So Gandhi is also constantly grappling with potential contradictions between these three roles. He's not simply a thinker. He is also a constant communicator and also a man of action. Thoughts are not just at the level of abstraction, but they have to be constantly applied. He's a philosopher. Bishnu was absolutely right. But he's a philosopher in a very Marxian kind of sense. The point is to change it, not just to understand the world. He's constantly involved with the project of changing the world, how to change the world, how to make the world better, or some part of the world better, as a laboratory. That is why he lives in ashrams. He tries out, makes many experiments in his small ashram. If they can work in an ashram, then he's going to try them out the outside for the larger world. So I think this handling this dilemma is very, very central to Gandhi and to Gandhi's practice and Gandhi's politics. While working this, I'm saying something which is not there in the volume, but I'm just sharing it with my colleagues. The famous American journalist Louis Fisher, who went and met Gandhi in 1942, spent time with him and wrote a book, My Week with Gandhi. There, on Gandhi's techniques of communication, he came up with a very, very interesting insight. He had met many leaders, and he made a comparison between Gandhi and Jinnah. And he said these two leaders are very contrasting. They have, in communication, they have contrasting styles. Jinnah is more like a record, a gramophone. You put a question to him, and the answer to the question is like a gramophone, playing of a gramophone. Every time the answer is going to be the same. Total consistency, no change, complete fixity, no flexibility. And Louis Fisher said, you can also hear the screeching of the gramophone as you listen to Jinnah, the same question. Whereas with Gandhi, when you put a question to Gandhi, it's like the beginning of a creative process. Gandhi never gives you full answers. You put a question to Gandhi, he provides a part answer. Then you say something, add to the answer, he incorporates your addition into his answer, and he gives a different answer. Then he thinks about it. So it's like the first draft of a book, second draft of a book. Every draft is different because every draft is getting better. Through dialogue, through communication, his thoughts are constantly being furnished, refurnished, chiseled, and getting better. And so Gandhi is changing constantly. There is no fixity, there is no inflexibility. His answers are changing because it's the, for him, for Gandhi, answer is the giving an answer to a question is the beginning of a creative process. It's like writing the first draft of a book, not the entire book. The entire book will happen later. So you can accuse him of being inconsistent because he's not consistent. And Gandhi said so himself he said in his communication, he's not consistent because he's constantly thinking about it, and people are making him change. It's his encounters with people, with Jawaharlal Nehru and with others, which make him change, which modify some of his ideas. So it's a creative process. For Gandhi, communication is a creative process. It's like the first draft of a book, and the book is constantly being written. That is Gandhi's communication technology, is basically like this: starting to write a book in many drafts, and the drafts are constantly being modified. My last point, I've reached 10 points. My last point is that I think the importance of Gandhi, and I think the reason why some of the reliance is placed also on his early writings, particularly Hind Swaraj, is the times, the 20th, partly 19th century, partly 20th century. A very grand set of ideas, very elegant, very coherent, sometimes applicable, sometimes not applicable, but glorious in their grandeur. I mean, Enlightenment ideas. Those ideas had been created, and I think large number of thinkers virtually lived under the spell of those ideas, even those who critiqued those ideas. The strength of the ideas precisely was that they created a kind of a disenchantment against. It started in Europe, but was also there in other places. The disenchantment started in the 19th century, continued in the 20th century. Gandhi constantly came in touch with those who were disenchanted with it. But the disenchantment with the Enlightenment was somewhat disoriented. It was looking for a path. It was looking for coherence. It was looking for a concrete alternative. The disenchantment was there, but that did not automatically translate into an equally coherent set of alternative. As grand, as elegant, as coherent alternative as the original vision was. And this search took many people to Gandhi. I think Gandhi himself was disenchanted, but he was working his disenchantment. He wanted to develop an instrumentalist relationship with modernity, with modern technology, with the ideas of enlightenment, but he always constantly wanted to get better. And I think Gandhi's journey is not just to reject or critique or dismiss enlightenment ideas or modernity or a simple and blind celebration of tradition, which was how Gandhi was traditionally understood, which is not true. Gandhi is constantly trying to look for or forge or fashion an alternative modernity. So he is trying to create an alternative, but this alternative is not alternative to modernity, but it is an alternative modernity. He's trying to forge an alternative modernity. Now, that's obviously not easy. There is a huge elephant in the room. You have to create spaces in the room to create an alternative elephant or another animal. That is what Gandhi is trying to do. That's not easy. But a lot of Gandhi's politics, his activities, his communications are trying to create enough space first so that an alternative can be created, an alternative to the huge elephant in the room, elephant in the boat. And I think that is what makes Gandhi so important, Gandhi in his totality, but particularly Gandhi as a communicator. And I think this book has plenty of food for thought, plenty of information, plenty of rich data, which should all enable us to make our own formulations, which would eventually try and modify the existing theories on communication. And those theories will hopefully be gotten rid of their European blinkers. And those theories without the European blinkers will become much more live, much more relevant, much more global, and much more applicable to modern world in all its diversity and complexity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Salil Mishra. The points that you have raised, starting with how the book has unfolded itself in the form of a debate, and how every narrative had with it also a counter narrative, and also how we look at Gandhi not in the dichotomies of a person celebrating tradition and completely against modernity, but trying to create an alternative modernity. Now, I would like to open the platform to our very editor of the book who is with us here today, Professor Biswajit Das, who is also the president of All India Communication and Media Association, ICMA. So now I open the platform to him and tell us everything that he has to about the book.
Thank you, Antara, for organizing such a wonderful event where inviting two esteemed scholars in different fields, also thinking on Gandhi from a different take. I'm not a Gandhian scholar, but I had interest in Gandhi. I remember when I was doing fieldwork, visiting different public institutions across the countrysides, I used to see everywhere Gandhi's photograph, Gandhi's frame behind every bureaucrat's office, and just behind the chair. And somewhere I see Gandhi is extremely annoyed with anxiety. Somewhere Gandhi is giving a very cheerful smile. All kinds of pictures. It just like Gandhi became a floating signifier. He became a floating signifier. And I was very curious about Gandhi. That interested me a lot with Gandhi, whether the way he has been appropriated by the public institutions or the state, or even how in our everyday conversations, how we talk about Gandhi. Now, when I started teaching intellectual history of communications, I was always being confronted by questions from the students doing research that is there any Indian way of engaging? What about Indian scholars? That also reflects, in a way, the lack of seriousness of the discipline, where hardly there is any effort or any kind of activities where you see that you sort of try to indigenize communication research or scholarship. In India, on the contrary, you find that we use scholarship, which I think is no connections. However, we are forced to do it. So that is where I always say about Gandhi is the answer, because Gandhi's use of metaphor, Gandhi's use of symbols, Gandhi the way he communicated, Gandhi the way he sort of tried to So every time we have seen Gandhi off and on, whether it is on globalization or even on teachability, or even the kind of journalism he practiced in South Africa as a kind of an advocacy journalism, all kinds of things. So Gandhi, then we thought of sort of trying to take up a challenge on organizing or trying to bring out a volume on Gandhi. And that is where also trying to probably look at it from a communication perspective, that how communication can be a vantage point to make an entry to understand Gandhi. So that will be probably, there are questions which are unexplored as yet, and probably we can make a justice by looking at, and that will be also an entry point, and also sort of trying to look at it in the future years to come, where we would like to also engage with more and more personalities and intellectuals who have contributed to communications, or whose readings, whose work can be referred from a communication point of view. I agree with both of you for an interesting your comments And I'm sure I agree with you that this is just the beginning, and there are a lot of food for thought to probably think about another volume and to more concretize on the basis of these arguments. I'm sure that we should engage with more theoretical questions with the Western epistemologies and how Gandhi provides another alternative to engage with these questions. I'm sure that it will provide, as Professor Bishnu Mohapatra talked about, Gandhi has to be looked at in a larger context of complex network of communications. I mean, as we rightly know that informations and ideas, what we see have traveled along complex routes. I mean, serviced by a newsletter, runner, petitions, writers, and information specialists of various sorts in Indian society. I mean, the spread of the lithographic press and the rise of newspaper, book publishing intensified. So this is also the context where Gandhi used different platforms. Gandhi also engaged with different kinds of media. So this is the question where we thought about revisiting Gandhian or Gandhian writings. I mean, that provides a full of possibilities and promise, in fact, in the realm of communication studies. The question is also, I agree that, as I have mentioned in the volume, that where does one locate his contributions in terms of theory and method? I mean, Gandhi was not a theoretician. He also did not consciously construct any blueprint. What Professor Salil Misra also talked about earlier as well. Um, I mean, in fact, I remember during the conference, also Professor Misra mentioned about all these in detail. So these are all well taken off in the volume itself. And the idea is that even in conventional social sciences, I agree with you that that was the purpose, that how Western Enlightenment and how critiques contextualize, in fact, Gandhian writings within a very narrow confines of modernity's celebration of scientific and technological progress in society. I mean, these assumptions were unacceptable to Gandhi. For Gandhi, I mean, Gandhi, through his writings, made a trenchant critique of the Enlightenment premised on the philosophy of progress. I mean, through instrumental modernity, Gandhi felt such a progress undermined and displaced, cultural values and faith from technologies of inquiry, and constructed a kind of a new social order around market relations overseen by a secular state. I mean, when we read Gandhi, we are moved by his text. I mean, in fact, as Professor Misra pointed out about Hinsoras, and in this volume there are two, I mean, articles on contradicting, how Hinsoras. So the idea is the volume is basically providing a space where we would like to take up different positions and counter positions. And it's a kind of an interdisciplinary engagement with the volume, as he rightly pointed out in the beginning, that how one needs to look at this volume in particular. It's not a homogenized kind of stuff where people, like-minded people, come together and sort of try to do.
Mhm.
But this is where you sort of, it opens up all possibilities in terms of how people engage and how address different ideas, so that Gandhi as a scholar, as an intellectual, as a person can be looked at. And this is also in the context that how we need to look at communication of ideas. So I'm more particular about, because these are the challenges for any interdisciplinary engagement, because that is probably missing in the Indian context when we look at that how we need to invite people of different disciplinary baggage coming and engaging with common questions on Gandhi, or for that matter, any idea. So this is what in the future we need to have such challenges to see that how we address. But today we can't confine to any disciplinary thought. That's where it is extremely limiting, and it doesn't provide any answer to any questions. I mean, for instance, like I have briefly mentioned about Marshall McLuhan, and where I have said that, like, I mean, in Gandhian thought, the power of a symbol is not independent of the truth of the message. I mean, for Gandhi, the medium of the message works diametrically opposite to the manner in which it was enunciated by Marshall McLuhan. In the Gandhian point of view, the message is not independent, and not every medium can carry every message. I mean, the medium is not material in the sense of truth and neutral in the sense of what you call truth and truthfulness. Critiques even have not delved much into imagination. Imagination is another very fertile field to engage. I mean, imagination can be productive. I mean, that is where we need to also engage, probably Gandhian imagination. That will be another entry point. Uh, Imagination or even metaphor and the use of various symbolic and cultural resources that Gandhian writings and practice carry within. In fact, culture. Culture is another. For Gandhi is a set of symbols, experience. I mean, there are so many possibilities to engage. Probably we have not nurtured much. Even he was a prolific writer and spoke always with the context and according to the demands of the situation in the and the way he perceived them. So there are different possibilities to engage and write, and probably that will be a starting point to engage. And in the communication, in the field of communication, that we need to tear apart things and put them all in a perspective to understand. So it's whole idea about symbolic resources, the way he has used, like what Professor Vishnu mentioned about Dharma Yudh, which I mean, what Sasi's paper on Ahmedabad strike. I mean, where in fact, in terms of communication, it was a failure. What he highlights about that Gandhi, the way he went on doing this, what he talks about moral struggle against injustice. I mean, he placed it in the context of a very broader struggle, not only in India, but in the world over. I mean, including South Africa, where Gandhi had first an experience of a successful, what you call Dharma Youth. I mean, given the challenges he faced in his political career, he was constantly looking for a better and more effective methods of communication all the time. I mean, you look at the open letter, the pamphlets, the kinds of things, the way he started his whole use and language of protest itself. I mean, that itself is another interesting area of engagement. And till date, the way we have been talking about Gandhian, forms of protest. So, so there are a lot of possibilities. Even journalism, in fact, is another. I mean, Gandhi wrote during a time, so everybody is misled. They think that Gandhi probably would have never thought of doing journalism in the present journalistic scenario. I mean, imagine Gandhi's brand of journalism is different. He's
Mhm.
trying to do more a kind of an advocacy journalism. I mean, Gandhi highlighted mostly on Hindu-Muslim amity, Indian independence, indentured laborers in South Africa, and above all about equality. I mean, he knew that writing about their plight so often would also keep them in the public eye. He was writing the the agenda in the South African press. See, there are a lot of possibilities. So, what this volume basically attempts to engage with some of the core issues of communication that may be discerned from a Gandhian writings and contributions so as to develop a starting point for any creative engagement with Indian communication. It also deals with the questions of knowledge, practice, and strategies of communication. And finally, the relevance of Gandhian communication in the present era. I mean, any discussion on the knowledge of communication in Indian society needs to address, I mean, these key attributes that contributes to the formation of communication and the constitution of Indian society. Thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Professor Taz, for telling us the fact that how Gandhi has been a floating signifier all the time, but then how are we interpreting him, seeing him as a communicator, telling us about the ideas. In fact, reminded me of the Professor Misra telling us how the text which is written back then in 1909, Hind Swaraj, is yet to be interpreted and yet to be added perspectives to what Bishnu Mohapatra said, that there is always a debate between Gandhi dwelling from tadbhav to tatsam usage of words. So yes, I mean, keeping all these things in mind, I really look forward to what Professor Das said, that there are so many possibilities of coming up with more interpretations on Gandhi through communication, and we would really look forward to more such volumes on such debates and dialectics of Gandhi. And so thank you so much to all the panelists and the editor to join us today, and I hope that all of us somewhere start reinterpreting Gandhi again in our contexts. So thank you so much from the Kalplok and Aikma.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.